Okay. So when I was in college, I had a roommate named Jim. And I'm going to be charitable here and say that Jim was not the most energetic person in the world. Um, but he seemed to be kind of proud of that fact. And one day he got something in the mail from his father, which he delightedly showed me. Um, his father had been searching through old stuff in the attic to get rid of things and found Jim's preschool report card there. And he showed me his report card, and he had gotten average in every activity except for two, in which he got excellent. And the two excellent activities were eating and resting. And some things never change to this day. Jim is excellent at eating and resting. So I want to dedicate today's session and our next session to Jim, because today we're going to be talking about the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, in other words, eating. And next time we'll be talking about HUD-funded rental assistance programs or resting. Today is the New York Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Everybody calls this food stamps still. Our objectives are to understand eligibility for SNAP, including some complicated details about who's included in the SNAP household for eligibility purposes, how to calculate net income and benefit amounts for SNAP. You'll be using an actual calculator that I had emailed you last night. It was one of the documents you should have received, and an email attachment. This is the generally most popular part of this training is that you've got an Excel spreadsheet you can use to estimate SNAP benefit amounts and changes to SNAP based on changes in earnings and other things. We'll be talking about two programs, one called NYESS, the New York State Combined Application Project, which is a way for single people on SSI to be automatically enrolled in SNAP, and the Transitional Benefit Alternative, TBA. That's continuing SNAP for 5 months for people who have transitioned off family assistance or safety net assistance benefits. Then we'll look at who's required to report earnings and other changes and how and how often. Looking at the SNAP certification periods, the periods in between, um, or the periods when people have to go through formal reviews of their eligibility, and to look at how to apply for SNAP. So this is a rather long PowerPoint. It's 89 slides long, and that's because it's designed not just for training, but to be used as a resource for you to be able to look up information. Um, so some of it I'll go through rather quickly, but just an overview of the SNAP program. Um, it provides help to eligible households simply to pay for food and nothing else. If the households have low incomes and in some cases low assets. And as I said, it can only be used to buy food. And most people still call it by its original name that goes back to the 1960s, food stamps, even though they haven't had stamps in quite a while. Uh, Honestly, I have a hard time calling it SNAP, SNAP, because where I live, SNAP stands for spay and neuter all pets. Exactly the marketing angle the program had in mind. But there you have it. So SNAP is federally funded, but it's administered at the state and local level. Um, At the state level, the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, OTDA, oversees the program, but the local Department of Social Services, their district offices in each county and the five boroughs of the city, administer it. So that's where people go to apply or go through recertifications, et cetera. They're done through the local DSS offices. Now, as I said, SNAP benefits are no longer issued in stamps. They're no longer food stamps. They're EBT cards, similar to debit cards, and you use these at the supermarket to purchase food. Now, this is an important concept with SNAP. Who's included in the SNAP household? And the rules are more complicated than for most other benefits that we deal with. So I want to spend a little time talking about this. First of all, what's the significance of the household? The household is a single person or a group of people who live together and who's we've got somebody off mute. Can be sure, check to make sure you're on mute. Great, thank you. Um, okay.
You
So the
muted.
household is the group of people who, oh, excuse me. Sorry. So the SNAP household is a single person or a group of people living together who are evaluated together for eligibility. Their income, maybe their assets are counted. They're included in the number of people in the household, and that helps determine whether they'll be eligible for SNAP and what their benefit amount will be. So the household could be a single person who lives alone, could be people who live together and buy and prepare their meals together. Or in some cases, it could be a person who's living with other people, but they're buying and preparing their food separately. So they could be considered a separate household. So a household is not necessarily everybody under the same roof, but there are some detailed rules about this. We're going to go through who must be included in the same SNAP household, can't be considered separate households. We'll talk about who may be included in the household, who is not included in the household, and who is not even eligible for SNAP. So, who must be included in the SNAP household? Basically, it's married people, so spouses, and any of their children who are age 21 or younger. They all have to be included in the same SNAP household if any of them are applying for SNAP, even if they're not buying and preparing their meals together. Okay. So, if any member of the household is married, their spouse must be included in their SNAP household. And if anybody, any parent living in the household has natural, adopted, or stepchildren living with them who are 21 or younger, the children need to be included in the same SNAP household as well. Okay. Um, Now, a minor child, other than a foster child, who's under age 18 and is not living with a parent, but is living under the parental control of an adult in the household, they must also be included. I love this term parental control. Whoever designed that definitely did not have teenagers, but that's the language they use. So it's basically spouses and their children and minor children living with an adult other than a parent all have to be included in the same SNAP household if any of them are applying. So, who may or may not be included in the SNAP household? If there's a child in foster care living in the household, then the household can choose to include that child in the household or to not include them. But the child cannot be considered a separate household. Now, if the foster child is included in the household, then any income they receive, as well as any foster care payments that the household gets for caring for the child, um, will be included in the SNAP budget for SNAP eligibility purposes. Now, this next one is a little weird. I've never really encountered this, but it's in the rules for every SNAP program in the country. Um, a person can be included or not included in the SNAP household. Um, they can be considered a separate household if they are age 60 or older, as well as their spouse, if they're married and their spouse lives with them. If they live with other people, they can't prepare meals because of a disability, um, or some other reason that's documented by a doctor. And the other people they live with, not including the person who's 60 or older and their spouse, have countable income under 165% of the federal poverty level. Very strange rule for this. I've never encountered it, but anyway, that person and their spouse could be a separate household if they choose. So, who is not included in the SNAP household? A roomer, that's a person who's paying for a room in the home, but not for meals. They would not be considered to be in the SNAP household because they're handling their meals separately. A live-in attendant for a person with a disability is not counted as part of the SNAP household. And there's a logic to that because that person is living there as a matter of convenience, not because they're a part of the same household. They're there to provide services. And in most cases, other people who live in the household but don't usually buy and prepare their food with other members of the household. They would generally not be included in the SNAP household unless they were one of those people who must be included, the spouses, the children 21 and under, etc. Um, Now, if somebody is living under the same roof with others, but they're not buying and preparing food together with the others. They may usually apply as a separate household if they're eligible. If somebody's off mute, please make sure you're on mute. All right, and then finally, who is not eligible for SNAP at all? Generally, people who live in institutional arrangements, though there are exceptions, and people who live in group homes for people with disabilities are potentially eligible. So that group homes would not be considered an institutional arrangement. People who live in commercial boarding houses, certain immigrants, those who are undocumented, and some others. People who don't comply with certain SNAP requirements, people who have been convicted of certain crimes, um, as well as people who are fleeing felons. This one makes me laugh. It's like, if you're a felon and you're on the lam from the law, how likely are you to stop at a DSS office to apply for SNAP benefits? People who are violating parole and probation. Students who are between 18 and 49 years old are not eligible unless they meet certain criteria that are rather detailed, and I provided you with a policy reference. And the policy manual link will be at the end of this PowerPoint. Uh, so, in case you want to look up deeper details. And with exceptions, people who are on strike are not eligible for SNAP. All right, so I'm going to pepper some questions throughout this just so you can test yourself. Which of the following is not a single SNAP household? A mother and her 20-year-old son who live together but buy and prepare meals separately. B, two unrelated roommates who buy and prepare meals together. Or C, a person with a disability and a live-in attendant who buy and prepare meals together. So, one of those groups of people is not a single SNAP household. So, which one is it? And please go ahead and type an answer in the chat, just A, B, or C. Okay, we've got some differences of opinion here. Okay, the most popular answers were A and B, but actually the correct answer is C. So A was a tempting answer because it's two people who live together but are handling their meals separately. Ordinarily, they would not be considered a single household. They could be separate households. But remember the people who must be included in the SNAP household, even if they're handling their meals separately. And that includes spouses and parents living with their children who are age 21 or younger. So that first one, the mother and her 20-year-old son, even though they're handling meals separately, must be considered a single household. Um, Now, B, two unrelated roommates who live together, who buy and prepare their meals together, they can be a single SNAP household, even if they're not related. But C, a person with a disability and a live-in attendant, even if they're buying and preparing meals together, would not be considered a single household of two people because a live-in attendant is not considered part of the same household as the person with a disability. They're a separate, they could be a separate household if they're eligible, but they would not be considered in the same household for SNAP purposes with the person with a disability. So the rules for determining who's in the SNAP household are rather complicated, and I did my best to summarize them here. Okay, so moving on. So who's eligible for SNAP? First, you need to know who's in the SNAP household. And then you look at their income and in some cases, their assets. And their incomes need to be below certain limits. Sometimes their assets do as well. We'll talk about when assets are relevant and when they're not. So there's a concept called categorical eligibility. And if a household is categorically eligible for SNAP, that means that technically they're eligible for SNAP without their assets being considered at all. And technically, they're not even supposed to have to prove their income eligibility to get SNAP, but that's really kind of squirrely. We'll talk about that in a moment. The big issue with categorical eligibility is it means that the household's assets are not going to be considered at all. Um, and it means that households of one or two people are guaranteed to get at least a minimum SNAP benefit. So, which households are categorically eligible? First, if everybody in the household gets SSI or family assistance or safety net assistance, then they're categorically eligible. Some members of the SNAP household may be getting some of those benefits or one of those benefits, others would be getting others. But if each member is getting at least one of those benefits, then they're categorically eligible. There are three other categories of categorical eligibility. The second one is probably the most common one. And this is probably encompasses a large percentage of households that are enrolled in SNAP. It's a household where at least one member of the household is disabled or age 60 or older. And obviously, that's going to be the vast majority of people that we're working with. Every SNAP household you work with, I assume, has at least one disabled member. Or the household is paying for dependent care expenses, even if nobody were disabled or age 60 or older. And the gross income for the household is 200% of the federal poverty level for their household size or less. So that's probably a very big percentage of people enrolled in SNAP. Number three, if they don't qualify under number one or two, categorical eligibility includes a household that has earned income that's included in the SNAP budget. It's determined for eligibility, and their gross household income is 150% of federal poverty for the household size or less, or the gross household income is 130% of federal poverty or less. So, uh, numbers one and two are probably the ones you'll be encountering most often. So, if a household meets any of those four criteria, they're categorically eligible. And we'll talk about what that means in a moment. But first, what is the definition of disabled for the SNAP program? Disability is a key issue for some facets of eligibility. So I wanted you to know how the SNAP program defines disability. Persons considered disabled if they get a Social Security disability benefit or an SSI benefit based on disability or an SSI state supplement or a benefit from the Railroad Retirement Board or a disability retirement benefit from another government agency if those benefits are based on Social Security's definition of disability, which means the vast majority of people that we're serving are definitely going to meet that definition of disability. Could also be a person who's getting a benefit from the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, that's based on being classified as 100% disabled, uh, permanent and total disability, or if they're receiving a benefit that's paid at the 100% disability rate from the VA, or if they're getting Medicaid that's based on disability. When you meet any of those three criteria, they're considered disabled for SNAP purposes. All right, so back to categorical eligibility. Um, so when is a household not categorically eligible, even if they meet the criteria, any of those four criteria on the previous slide? Um, if any member of the household is disqualified for an intentional program violation, or if they fail to comply with um, reporting changes as required, or failing to meet the work requirement that applies to most adult members who are not disabled. We'll get to the work requirement in a little bit. Um, then they're not categorically eligible. But otherwise, if they meet any of those four criteria on that previous slide, they are categorically eligible. So technically, if they're categorically eligible, they're not subject to the income and asset tests. The income test is still going to be relevant to them, honestly. I'm not sure why they say they're not subject to the income test, but but the asset test is not. That's not going to be relevant to them. Okay, so what does categorical eligibility mean in real practical terms, in terms of actually getting a SNAP benefit? For a household that has one or two members and is categorically eligible, categorical eligibility means that they will be guaranteed to be eligible for at least the minimum SNAP benefit, which is $23 a month after the first month, even if the SNAP calculation that we'll be looking at with the SNAP calculator later, even if the SNAP calculator shows that they should be getting less than $23 a month or zero, they're still guaranteed to be eligible for at least $23 a month. Okay. Not a huge benefit. Categorical eligibility doesn't make that big a difference, honestly. Now, a categorically eligible household with one or two members could get more than $23 a month if the calculation shows they should. But they simply are guaranteed to get at least $23 a month, even if the calculation shows they should get less or zero. That's it. What if the categorically eligible household has three members or more? Then they're not even guaranteed to get the minimum $23 a month. Categorical eligibility doesn't really mean anything for them. So it's a little difficult to understand why they even bother with categorical eligibility, honestly. So work registration. So non-disabled household members who are 16 to 59 years old are usually required to register for work and participate in training or actual work as a condition of eligibility for SNAP. But there are a number of exceptions when people age 16 to 59 don't have to comply with the work requirement. For people on the younger end of the scale, school attendance is an exception. Um, Now, people who are, and I put this in quotes because it's offensive, people who are considered physically or mentally unfit for employment. And that offensive term is meant to include people who are receiving SSI or Title II disability benefits are not required to comply with the work requirement as a condition of eligibility for SNAP. Okay. That's not necessarily something that we want to advertise to people since we're in the business of encouraging people to work and supporting them to do so, but they are not required to work as a condition of eligibility for SNAP. So most households in New York, I believe, are categorically eligible. So the advantage they have from categorical eligibility, the main one is their resources don't matter. Their assets are not considered for eligibility if they're categorically eligible. But if the household is not categorically eligible, then they do have to meet a resource test. If the household has at least one member who's disabled or at least age 60, then the resource limit is $4,500. If nobody in the household is disabled or at least 60 years old, the resource limit is only $3,000. And these limits are sometimes updated annually in October, along with other changes to the SNAP benefit. The SNAP year is based on the federal fiscal year. It goes from October 1st through the following September 30th. And most rule changes for SNAP occur on October 1st. So most resources count if the household is not categorically eligible and they're subject to the resource limit. And if you look at the types of resources on slide 19 that don't count, that are excluded, you'll see that most of them are the same as types of resources that don't count for SSI purposes. The only exception is most retirement plans, um, and the cash value of a life insurance policy, like a whole life policy that a person can withdraw while they're still alive. Those two resources are usually counted for SSI purposes, but not for SNAP resource eligibility. So, what are the maximum SNAP benefit amounts? Depends on the household size. They range from $292 a month for a single person household to $1,756 a month for a household of eight. And if the household is larger than that, you'd add $220 a month to each for each additional member. And these maximum benefit amounts are also referred to as the thrifty food plan amounts. So I'm going to pause for a moment. I've been going for a little while here just to see if anyone has any questions or comments so far. You can either type them into the chat or come off mute if you prefer. Not yet. Okay. So now let's get into,
I have a question.
oh, yes, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. What's a type 2 disability?
Oh, Title II. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
Title 2. I'm sorry. Title
No,
2.
no, no, that's okay. Yeah, I apologize. That's one bit of jargon that benefits planners or work incentive practitioners are familiar with, that I should have taken out. Title II disability is Social Security disability, often abbreviated as SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance. And there are several ways to qualify for it. And they're kind of generically referred to as Title II disability benefits. Thank you
Okay.
for asking that question. So
Oh,
Title II disability simply means Social Security disability benefits.
okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you for asking that. I have a feeling you were not the only person who wasn't aware of what that meant. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so we talked a lot about eligibility and stuff. Let's get into now how other income affects the SNAP amount. A bit later, we're going to be looking at that Excel spreadsheet, that SNAP calculator that lets you estimate the impact of other income, particularly earnings and other changes in circumstances on the SNAP benefit amount that a household gets. But first, I wanted to give you a couple of quick and easy rules of thumb. So, so the SNAP amount is reduced by 30% of a household's net income. And there's this very complicated formula that's used to determine their net income. I don't have it memorized myself. That's why we've got a spreadsheet to do this calculation for you. But couple of little rules of thumb. One is if a household starts getting earned income, the earned income is usually going to reduce their SNAP benefit amount by no more than 24% of the earned income amount. Okay. I just kind of figured this out by playing around with the SNAP calculation and realized, oh, if you start getting earned income, your SNAP may go down, but not by more than 24% of the earned income amount. So what does that mean? That means the household's going to have more money if somebody in the household works than if they don't. Yes, the SNAP amount may go down, but it's going to go down by no more than 24% of the earnings, which means the household is going to come out ahead by at least 76% of the amount of the earnings. So their increase in income from the earnings will be much more than the decrease in the SNAP amount that results. So it pays for them to work. Now, I wanted to highlight one key type of income that is not counted for SNAP purposes. If any of you work with children under age 18 who are still in school and who are working, if a child under age 18 who's attending grade school or high school at least half time, if they're in a SNAP household and they're working for pay, their earnings from work are not counted as income for SNAP and will not reduce their household's SNAP amount. Okay. And I'm assuming that some of you may work with children still in school who are working, and their earnings are not counted. Other income the children get will be counted, but not their earnings from work.
Michael, may I ask a question?
Sure, please.
So does that include when they're out of school during the summer?
It does include when they're out of school during the summer. Good question. Yeah, as long as
Okay,
they're
thank you.
enrolled and they're attending during the customary school attendance times. If they're off for holidays or summer, that would still, the rule would still apply. Their earnings would not count. It's a great question because they're more likely to be earning money or earning more money during the summer than during the school year. So that may be a bigger benefit. Thanks for that question, Dawn. Um, okay, so when earnings do count, they're generally not going to reduce the SNAP amount by more than 24% of the amount of the earnings. But earnings of a child under age 18 who's in school do not count and don't reduce the SNAP amount at all. So, a couple of quick exercises for you based on these 2 points. An adult member of a SNAP household earns $1,000 a month gross wages. What is the largest amount by which you would expect the household SNAP benefit to be reduced? A, $240 a month, B, $1,000 a month, or C, $160 a month. And please go ahead and type it into the chat. Um, okay. Give you a little time. Type an answer in. Okay, we have pretty broad agreement on this one. Looks like everybody has answered A, and A is correct. If the earnings are counted, $1,000 a month, you'd expect the SNAP benefit to be reduced by no more than 24% of that, which is $240 a month. So A is correct. Next one. A 17-year-old high school student who lives in a SNAP household starts earning $1,000 a month gross wages. What is the largest amount by which you would expect the SNAP benefit to be reduced? $240 a month, $160 a month, or $0 a month? Okay, give you a few more seconds to type in an answer. All right, we've got universal agreement on this one too. All of you who answered C, and C is correct. If the student is attending the grade school or high school at least half time and is under age 18, their earnings from work will not affect the household SNAP benefit. So correct answer is C or 0. Great. Okay, so we are going to go through this SNAP calculator in a little bit, which is used to estimate the impact of earnings or other income or other changes in a household SNAP benefit amount. And in my experience, if you've got accurate information that you enter into it correctly, it provides pretty accurate estimates of how those changes will affect the household SNAP benefit. However, in bold here, I did have the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, OTDA, that oversees SNAP at the state level, review this PowerPoint. And they asked me to put in this disclaimer, which I did in bold, that the SNAP calculator is only providing estimates, and official decisions on eligibility and how much a household should get in SNAP benefits are made by the DSS district offices. They're the only ones who can tell you how much the SNAP amount should be and whether or not the household is actually eligible. And that's fair. That's fair. When you use the SNAP calculator, you always want to let individuals or households know that you're just providing estimates. You cannot certify that that's the actual amount of SNAP that they will get. Even if you enter the dollar amounts that the person or the family told you, their income amounts, et cetera, if they gave you inaccurate information, but the DSS office gets accurate information from online sources or actual proof of income, then because you had inaccurate dollar amounts that you entered into the calculation, you're going to get an inaccurate calculation amount. But in my experience, if you've got accurate information that you enter accurately into the calculator, you'll get a pretty accurate estimate, but you never want to tell people this is the actual amount of SNAP you're going to get. Just say this is an estimate. So, going to talk a little bit now about types of income that count or don't count, and certain deductions in the SNAP calculation that are allowed. So hold on, it gets better. This part's kind of a slog, but I wanted you to have all of this information to be able to look up and to run through it kind of quickly. So we've got unearned income and then earned income. Which kinds of unearned income count? So unearned income is generally uh, income that was not direct payment for work performed. We'll get to earned income in a moment, but unearned income is basically anything other than direct payment for work that a person did. Okay. And if you look at the SSI rules about which types of unearned income count, you'll find that the types of unearned income that count for the SSI program are very similar to the types of income that count for the SNAP program. But the SNAP program also counts some types of need-based assistance payments like SSI that the SSI program does not count. Now, most lump sum payments that a household member gets that are one time, that are not recurring, are not counted as income. Rather, they're counted as resources. So that's kind of cool. If somebody gets a big back pay for a benefit, for example, it's not going to count as income when they get it. It'll count as a resource. But if they're in a household that's categorically eligible, remember, big advantage of categorical eligibility is resources don't matter. The resource limit is not applied. They don't check resources. So that would mean you could get a big lump sum. It wouldn't count as income. And if you're categorically eligible, resources don't matter. Now, this next one makes me think about how this rule came about. This just happened within the last few years. There's a rule that says if any household member gets winnings from a lottery or gambling, and in a single game, they got winnings that equal or exceed the resource limit for a so-called elderly or disabled household. Um, Household where at least one member is disabled or at least age 60. And that resource limit for an elderly or disabled household, as a reminder, is $4,500 currently. Then the household is not eligible for SNAP, but they can apply again at any point if their countable resources fall below the resource limit. And this is true even if the household would otherwise be categorically eligible. If somebody in the household wins the lottery or has a gambling spree in Atlantic City and they win $4,500, they're no longer eligible for SNAP until their resources fall below the resource limit. So I figure that some jerk who was on SNAP won the lottery, probably won a big lottery, and then reapplied or was recert or tried to get recertified for SNAP. And because they were in a categorically eligible household, resources didn't count at the time under these old rules. They got a one-time lump sum, gambling winnings, and that didn't affect their eligibility for SNAP. And Congress found out about it. And they passed this new rule that hurt everybody because one jerk took advantage of the system. Anyway, Um, so that's lottery and gambling winnings. What about earned income? Earned income includes the same kinds of earned income that the SSI program does. That would be things like wages, tips, salaries, self-employment income, royalties if somebody sells a book or a movie script, something like that. Um, so earned income is direct payment for work performed. So um, some of you know that when you're doing calculations for different benefits, you often need to know how many weeks of earnings, how many weeks of wages are counted in a month. For some programs, it's 4 weeks. For some, it's 4 1/3 weeks worth of wages. For the SNAP program, it's 4 1/3 weeks worth of wages that are counted in the SNAP calculation. And they've got somebody who is pretty obsessive uh, at OTDA who set this policy. In most other states, they'll say, well, 4.3 weeks. In New York, it's 4.333333 weeks per month of wages. Um, and for wages that are paid biweekly, it's 2.166666 weeks worth. Um, or times the biweekly wages. Excuse me, I should say biweekly. Um, so basically, you're taking 4 1/3 weekly wage amounts to figure out the monthly wage amounts. If a household member is self-employed, generally their self-employment earnings are going to be averaged over a 12-month period, unless they're seasonally self-employed, in which case their earnings will be averaged over the season that they're working. Now, if there's a significant change in their self-employment income and how much they're making, um, then they can report that, and then the income will be re-annualized. It'll be redetermined how much they're expecting and over what period it should be averaged. So, talked about income types, and now let's talk about the income deductions. These are all included in the SNAP calculator that we'll be looking at, but I wanted to go through them with you first here in the PowerPoint. So there's an earned income deduction that's applied to gross wages. It's 20%. The SNAP calculator automatically deducts it when you enter the gross wage amount. If somebody is self-employed, most business expenses are deducted from their self-employment earnings, and then from the difference, the calculation subtracts 20% of the net. So that 20% deduction is considered to cover costs of maintaining employment, like work clothes, transportation, etc. Now, there are some business expenses that are not deducted from self-employment earnings in the SNAP calculation. Certain net losses from prior periods, uh, income taxes that are taken out, money set aside for retirement, other personal expenses, depreciation and garnishments um, are not allowed as business expenses. Now, what kinds of income are not counted in the SNAP calculation? Well, we talked about the non-recurring lump sum payments, which are counted as resources rather than income. And we talked about earned income from work of a student in grade school or high school who's under age 18 and attending school at least half time. Um, Self-employment business expenses are deducted. Uh, Benefit amounts that are being withheld to recover overpayments don't count. In-kind income. If somebody's in a HUD rental assistance program, the rental assistance payments that they're getting don't count as income. Certain child support that's received by ADC recipients that has to be transferred to the agency that's administering the benefit. Cash donations from private nonprofits that are based on financial need of $300 a quarter or less. Infrequent or irregular payments of $30 per quarter or less. Most student financial aid doesn't count, but if there's any portion that's used for rent or food or ordinary everyday living expenses, that does count. Loans don't count as income because they have to be repaid. Expense reimbursements, um, energy weatherization assistance, payments of earned income tax credit, um, and some others. All right, quick test here. Which one of the following kinds of income will not reduce SNAP benefits? A, SSI, B, a $100 contribution from a nonprofit agency, or C, self-employment earnings? Which one of these is not counted as income for SNAP purposes, A, B, or C? Oh, and Stephanie had a question. What is in-kind income? In-kind income is income that's not money. Like, for example, if somebody provides you with free housing or with I don't know, something through barter, that would generally be considered in-kind income rather than cash income. You're welcome, Stephanie. Okay. Um, Heating assistance. Uh, Heating assistance, I believe, is not counted as income. I'd have to look that up to be certain, Ken, but yeah, weatherization assistance I did mention is not counted. Heating assistance like low income home energy assistance program. Well, actually, we're going to be talking about low income home energy assistance program a bit more a little later on. There's a special way that that's treated. Um, so yeah, so stay tuned. All right. So the most popular answer was the correct one, B, a $100 contribution from a nonprofit agency, assuming that it's based on need. SSI payments do count as income. They are included in the SNAP calculation, and self-employment earnings are as well. Okay, some deductions in the SNAP calculation. Go through these kind of quickly because they do appear line by line in the SNAP calculator. Um, if there are members of the household who are disabled or at least age 60, the medical expenses that they incur can be deducted, but only the amount that exceeds $35 a month. So you take all the members of the household who are disabled or at least 60 years old. You add up all of their medical expenses. You take that total, subtract the first $35, and the remaining amount is subtracted from income in the SNAP calculation. And the definition of medical expenses is pretty expansive. It includes what you would ordinarily think of as medical expenses, plus health insurance and Medicare premiums, spend down amounts if a person's spending down to get Medicaid, um, cost sharing, like uh, copays for Medicaid, in-home aides, attendants, homemaker or childcare providers needed because of an age or disability, transportation to and from medical services, service animal expenses, hearing aids, prosthetics, eyeglasses, dentures, other assistive technology, and loan payments to pay for a one-time medical expense. And you can look up in the manual a more exhaustive list of medical expenses if you want to check something. But it's only medical expenses for household members who are disabled or at least age 60. And it's only the total amount that exceeds $35 a month. Those of you familiar with the Plan to Achieve Self-Support, which is a work incentive in the SSI program designed to help people on SSI or trying to qualify for SSI achieve a work goal by helping them pay for expenses needed to reach that goal. The expenses that a person pays for through a pass are deducted from income in the SNAP calculation. And that helps keep the SNAP benefit amount from decreasing as much when a person uses a pass. And you'll see when we get to the SNAP calculator that that's included in there. Dependent care expenses can be deducted in the calculation if they're needed for any household member to look for, accept, or continue paid work or training or education to prepare for employment. The dependent care has to be for a child under age 18 or a household member of any age with a disability. There used to be a limit on the amount of dependent care expenses that were allowed to be deducted. That changed, I believe, last year in New York. Although the SNAP source book may not yet be updated to reflect that. So OTDA folks told me about that. That's good news. You can deduct any amount of dependent care expenses without an upper limit, as long as you're actually paying for them. Child support payments are deducted in the SNAP calculation if somebody in the household is court ordered, legally obligated to pay child support to someone outside of the SNAP household, and they actually do make those payments, then they're deducted. Okay, so which of the following is not a deduction from income for SNAP? A, pass expenses, B, legally required child support payments, or C, medical expenses of a non-disabled 30-year-old. Okay, let's take a few more seconds. Okay. Okay, the most popular answer was the correct one. Medical expenses of a non-disabled 30-year-old. Remember, it's only medical expenses of a person who's disabled or at least age 60. The past expenses and the court-ordered child support payments are allowable deductions. Now, there are some deductions in the SNAP calculation for shelter costs, for housing costs. There's one for people who are technically homeless, don't have an actual permanent home, but are living in temporary housing and paying something for it. And the amount that's deducted for this homeless shelter deduction is the greater of either $190.30 a month, if they're paying that amount or less for their temporary housing, or the actual amount that they're spending on shelter costs if it's more than $190.30 a month. But they need to be able to document the expenses. So that's going to be the only deduction for a homeless household, and only if they are paying something for temporary housing. If they're living in shelter and they're not paying anything, then they don't get the homeless shelter deduction. But if they live in temporary housing and they're paying $50 a month, they're paying something, they would get the standard deduction of 190 and 30 cents. If they're paying $250 a month for temporary housing, that's more than the standard deduction amount. They'd get to deduct the whole 250. Now, this is where it gets really weird. I look at the SNAP calculation and I think if I had a year to come up with the most complicated calculation for a public benefit that I could, and I were really trying, I could not do better than the SNAP calculation did without even trying. Um, so there's a portion of shelter costs called excess shelter costs that are the amount of shelter costs that exceed 50% of household income after certain deductions that can be deducted from income in the SNAP calculation. It's just weird. Don't ask me for any logic in it. Um, there is a limit on those excess shelter costs being deducted that applies to some households, but not households that have at least one member who's disabled or at least age 60. And I assume that's going to be every household that you're working with. So there's no limit on the excess shelter costs that those households can deduct. So in addition to basic housing payments like rent or mortgage, there's also a deduction for utilities. There are utility allowances, and these are kind of interesting. You have to look at the rules kind of carefully to see which of several utility allowances a household can get. So they can get a utility allowance if the household is paying for utilities that are not included in their rent. And there are standard utility allowances, a fixed dollar amount that they can use if they qualify for them. But if their actual utility costs that they can document are greater than the standard utility allowance amount, they can deduct the full amount of their utilities. So what are the standard utility allowances? First, there's a standard allowance for heating or cooling, and they get this if they are paying for heating or cooling not included in their rent. So that could be gas or electric or oil, uh, heat, if they're paying for heating. For cooling, it could be central air. It could be, paying just the electricity for window air conditioners. That would qualify them for the standard allowance for heating or cooling. They don't have to be paying for both heating and cooling, just one or the other, or both. Okay. Now they also qualify for the standard allowance for heating or cooling if they're entitled to assistance from the Home Energy Assistance Program or the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Act program, or another program funded by Low Income Home Energy Assistance Act. The LIHEAP, Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, is generally considered one of them. So not only does energy assistance not count as income, but getting energy assistance can qualify a household for this standard allowance for heating or cooling. And the standard heating or cooling allowance amount depends on where in the state the household lives. So it's highest in New York City, as you would expect, 1,034 a month. In Nassau and Suffolk counties, it's 962 a month. And anywhere else in the state, it's $854 a month. But if the household is paying for heating or cooling or both, and their actual costs are greater than the standard amount, and they can document that, they'll get a deduction that's equal to the actual amount they're paying. But if they pay the actual heating or cooling standard allowance amount or less for heating or cooling, they get to deduct the full standard allowance amount. So, what if they're not paying for heating or cooling, but they're paying for other utilities? Then they could use what's called the standard allowance for utilities. They have to be paying for at least one other utility, not heating or cooling. And that could be electricity, water, gas or cooking fuel, sewer or garbage collection, meaning they're paying for electricity but not the heat, or the cooling, they're paying for gas, but it's not gas heat. Um, so they're paying for at least one of those utilities. And then they can use the standard allowance for utilities. And the dollar amounts appear on slide 47, depending on where in the state they live. And then finally, if the household pays only for telephone service and no other utilities, could be landline or cell, there's a standard allowance for telephones, and that is $31 a month everywhere in the state. But they can only use the telephone allowance if they're not paying for any other utilities. And fortunately, following that rule, if they're paying more than $31 a month for phone, which most of us are, they could get the deduction for the full amount of the telephone service if they can document it. Okay, in the SNAP calculation, it shows that if a household is not categorically eligible, but at least one member is disabled or age 60 or older, they have to meet a net income limit of 100% of the federal poverty level. And it's weird, they go with the federal poverty level from the previous year, generally. Um, so the um, the net income limits, 100% of federal poverty for 2024 are going to be used until October 1st, 2025. But the SNAP calculator addresses this. So finally, how do you calculate net monthly income and actual benefit amounts? I'm going to skip through these slides because we're going to look at this in the Snap calculator. Um, and I think we will take a break now. When we come back, I'm going to show you the Snap calculator. We'll do an example together, and then um, you've got 9 exercises where you're going to estimate SNAP benefit amounts for particular households. Any questions or comments before we take a break? Okay, we're doing well on time here. I think we can break for 15 minutes. So enjoy your break. I'll see you in 15.
Michael, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. I actually knew at that time. Okay, I have not started yet. I'm just pulling up the SNAP calculator. Okay. So if there's anyone who did not receive the email that I sent yesterday evening, that included two attachments, the PowerPoint and this Snap calculator, um, I'm going to ask if you could please type your email into the chat, and I'm going to ask if someone would be willing to volunteer to forward that email to whomever didn't get it and put their email in the chat. Um, so we can go ahead and get going. Okay. Thank you very much, Jennifer. I appreciate it. Okay, if anybody besides Robert and Gustavo did not get the email yesterday, Jeffrey, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and walk through this calculator with you, um, giving time to those of you who didn't get it yet to actually receive it and download it. But this is the good part, okay? Some of those slides were a bit trying in the abstract, but I think putting it together in this calculator makes it come alive a bit. So, the SNAP calculator, once again, just to repeat, is just used to give estimates of SNAP amounts for different households. You never want to tell anybody that they're going to receive X amount of SNAP. Always tell them this is an estimate. The top of this calculator reminds us that uh, this is to be used only for households that have at least one member who's disabled or at least age 60. Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. And I believe that's probably going to be pretty much everyone that we work with anyway. And remember, there were some special advantages to households that have at least one member who's disabled or age 60 or older. By the way, I'm using the term age 60 or older. The SNAP program refers to that as aged, and that's not aged. Aged is 90. Um, but um, but it's weird because these programs, these benefits can't even agree on who's old. The SNAP program says old is 60. Medicaid says old is 65. And when we do our next training on HUD rental assistance programs, HUD says age 62 is old. So they can't agree on anything. So this calculator should work for families that we're supporting or individuals. But I did put that disclaimer at the top because if, say, you want to use this for some family member or friend who's in a household that may qualify for SNAP, in which nobody is disabled or at least 60 years old, this is not the tool to use for them. This won't work. So all of your data entry on this sheet is going to go in column B, where you can see a number of dollar signs. Column A is sort of the descriptions of what each line addresses. And some of the descriptions are pretty detailed. My recommendation to you is to always go from the top down, starting with household size, which you'll see on lines 3 and 4. Line 3 says household size in column B, and right below it is a 0. And you can change that to whatever the household size is. And go straight down the line and enter any dollar amounts for any lines that are relevant to the household. If you just go through each line, skipping the ones that are not relevant to a household, but that way you can make sure you don't miss anything. You're far more likely to get correct answers. Okay. Now, if you look over to the right in column F on this spreadsheet, you'll actually see some dollar amounts that are automatically inserted in the calculator once you've entered a household size, but they're included just as a reminder of what those dollar amounts are. So the Thrifty Food Plan amounts, that's the maximum SNAP benefit amounts, appear in column F, lines 7 to 16, and column G has the actual dollar amounts. And then there are standard deductions that are automatically deducted when you enter the household size that appear a little farther down. For household of 1 to 3 people, the standard deduction is $204 a month. For 4 people, the standard deduction is $217 a month. For 5 people, it's $254 a month. And for 6 or more people, it's $291 a month. And you'll see where the standard deduction is entered in after you've entered the household size. It happens automatically. So I just wanted you to know why that information was there, but you don't have to do anything with it. The calculator will enter it automatically once you've entered a household size. So you start with the household size. Let's say it's 2 people. So you go to household size, column B, line 3, and right below that, line 4 has a 0. We're going to go ahead and put our cursor there and change that 0 to 2. And when you move your cursor out of that field, if you go down and look at line 16, which is the standard deduction, it automatically entered $204, which is the standard deduction for a household of 1, 2, or 3 people. Okay. The other thing it does, if you look all the way down at line 40, Thrifty Food Plan amount, it automatically enters the maximum SNAP benefit for a household of 2 people, $536. Okay. So that happens automatically as soon as you've entered the household size. Now we come down to line 8, unearned monthly income. Let's say that one member of this 2-person household is getting SSDI of $1,200 a month. That's going to be unearned income. And we can go ahead and enter that on line 8, again in column B where the dollar sign is. And let's say that the other person has gross wages. They're getting $300 a month. So line 9, gross monthly wages, $300. After you've entered the 300 and moved the cursor out of that field, you'll see net monthly wages appear on line 10, $240. That's because the spreadsheet automatically deducted the 20% deduction from wages. 20% of 300 is $60. 300 minus 60 is 240. Next down, line 12, is gross monthly self-employment earnings. Okay, let's assume that somebody, one of the two people in this household, has self-employment earnings. And let's make that $200 a month. Next line down, line 13 is business expenses. Let's assume their business expenses are $100 a month. And then the net monthly self-employment earnings on line 14 automatically calculates as $80. How did that happen? Take the 200 self-employment earnings minus the 100 business expenses. That equals $100 of net self-employment earnings. And then the 20% is subtracted from that, and that leaves $80. Okay, down to line 16, the standard deduction is already there. Next, we've got monthly medical expenses for members aged 60 or older or disabled. Well, we have at least one member of this household who is disabled, the one who's getting the SSDI of $1,200 a month. Let's assume that person is paying $100 a month for medical expenses. And remember, there's a pretty broad definition of what counts as a medical expense. Entering that, and it's only the medical expenses of household members who are at least 60 years old or disabled. You add all of their combined medical expenses on line 17. I entered $100. On line 18, net monthly medical expenses, it shows 65 because the calculation subtracts the first $35 a month of those medical expenses, and the remaining amount is the deductible amount. Okay. Moving down to line 21, you see pass expenses. Nobody in this household is using a pass, but if they were, we would enter pass expenses there. Next down, oh dear, I have to correct this. I did not update this since the rules changed, and there's no longer an upper limit on how much can be deducted for dependent care payments needed for work, training, or education to prepare for work. I will correct that. It's only going to change the comment in parentheses there that has a $200 or $175 limit per month per child or dependent for dependent care payments. That's going to be deleted. Everything else there will be the same. So in this household, there are no dependents, no dependent care payments. So we'll leave that blank. Next down, line 23, court-ordered child support that's paid. Let's say that that's $50 a month. Okay. Now the spreadsheet automatically calculates the adjusted income on line 24. That's the income minus the deductions that we just went through. And then it takes half of that adjusted income on line 25, and that factors into the calculation further down. Next, we get to the shelter costs. The homeless shelter allowance is on line 27, but our household here is not homeless, so we'll skip that. Then we've got two options for entering basic housing payments. Line 28 is a flat monthly shelter payment. That would be if all utilities were included in the rent. This might be the case, for example, if people live in certain housing programs, residential programs, maybe where they pay a flat fee to their program provider that covers all their housing and utilities. Okay. But for most people pay for at least some utilities separately from their rent or their mortgage. And then their housing payment is going to go on line 29, monthly rent or mortgage, if paying for any utilities separately from rent or mortgage. That's going to be the case for this household we're dealing with now. Let's say they're paying $1,000 a month for rent. Next, we look at whether they qualify for a utility allowance. We had three choices of standard allowances, and I just realized I'm going to need to modify this sheet one more time. I'm going to send you later today a revised version that will also add in the actual utility amount if it's greater than the standard allowance that a household can use. Okay. Um, oh, actually, no, I take that back. The explanations of the standard allowances do say or actual amount if greater. So you can go ahead and enter either the standard dollar amount or the actual amount if it's greater and the household can document it. So line 30 is the standard allowance for heating, cooling. Remember, that's if they're paying something for heating or cooling or both. And the dollar amounts depend on whether they live in the city, in Nassau or Suffolk County, or in the rest of the state. If they don't pay for either heating or cooling, they don't pay for either of those, then you look at the standard allowance for utilities. And that's if they're paying for at least one utility other than phone, which could be electricity, gas or cooking fuel, water, sewerage, or garbage collection. Then you'll use either the dollar amount that appears on line 31 or the actual amount if it's greater. And then finally, if they don't pay for any utilities except for telephone, then you go with the telephone allowance, which is either $31, this is on line 32, or the actual amount if it's greater. Okay, so let me present a couple of options for this fictional household. Let's suppose that they are paying for just electricity and telephone, no other utilities. And the electricity operates window air conditioning units in the summer, as well as their lights and maybe stove, that kind of thing. Okay. Which utility allowance? Oh, and let's say that they're paying $200 a month for electricity. and that electricity is operating window air conditioners. So which utility allowance should they be using? And you can go ahead and type that into the chat. Would it be the standard allowance for heating or cooling, standard allowance for utilities, or the standard allowance for telephone? Okay, we have a couple of answers so far. So far, everybody's saying the same thing. Okay, we've got agreement. It's the standard allowance for heating or cooling, which is correct because even though they're only paying for electricity, since it does operate window air conditioners, that's cooling, they get the standard allowance. And since they're only paying $200 a month, which is less than the standard allowance amount, they get to deduct the full amount of the standard allowance. Let's say that this couple lives somewhere other than the city, Nassau and Suffolk County. So it's going to be $854 a month for the rest of the state. I'm going to go ahead and enter that. So they only get to use one of these allowances, not more than one. Now, this household is paying for phone service, but they'd get the standard allowance for telephone only if telephone were the only thing they were paying. And the heating cooling allowance that they get is worth a lot more than telephone allowance anyway. Okay. So, is this household categorically eligible? Well, one criterion for categorical eligibility is if their gross income is under 200% of the federal poverty level for the household size. And if you look all the way down at lines 52 and 53, you'll see that 200% federal poverty for two people is $3,407 a month. How much is this household's gross household income? Line 52 tells you 1,580. So their gross income is under 200% of federal poverty. They meet at least one of the standards for categorical eligibility. And that means they are categorically eligible. Now, if they were not categorically eligible, back up to line 37, then their net monthly income would have to be less than the dollar amounts on line 37, which equal 100% of federal poverty level for 2024. Okay. But this household is categorically eligible, so that's not relevant. Now, their net monthly income on line 36 is zero anyway. So they would meet that criterion, even if they were not categorically eligible. So we go down to line 40, the thrifty food plan amount, the maximum SNAP benefit for a household of two people, 536, and their actual SNAP benefit amount is 536 because their net monthly income was zero. Okay. Other information, the resource limit is shown lines 43 and 44. Reminds you that it's not relevant to categorically eligible households. For others that are not categorically eligible, it's $4,500 if the household includes at least one member who's disabled or age 60 or older. I didn't list the resource limit for a household where there's nobody who's disabled or age 60 or older. That was $3,000. But remember, this version of the sheet is only for households that have at least one member who's disabled or at least age 60. Lines 46 to 50 summarize the categorical eligibility requirements, and I actually left out a couple of them. I'll go ahead and add those in. But the two most important, or really the most important, is the 200% federal poverty one. But I'm going to go ahead and revise that a little when I send you the spreadsheet a little later today. But the way it is now, it should work for every example you're going to be using. All right. Now, suppose this person in this household who's getting $1,200 a month SSDI, unearned monthly income on line 8, now starts doing paid work. And they're earning $1,000 a month gross wages. What happens to this sheet if we change that, make that change? So the other household member on line 9, gross monthly wages, was already making $300 a month in gross wages. Now, the household member who gets the SSDI is adding $1,000 a month gross wages to that. So let's change our gross monthly wages to 1,300, 300 plus 1,000. And let's see what that does to the SNAP benefit amount. Let's assume nothing else changes for this household. So now, if you look at the SNAP benefit amount on slide 41, it went way down to just under $192 a month. And generally, the SNAP benefit amount is rounded down to the next lower whole number. So you'd say $191. Okay. So this household's SNAP benefit went down from 536 to 191. That's a reduction of about 345 a month. So the SNAP went down by about $345 a month, but the household's income went up by $1,000 a month. The wages went from 300 to 1,300. So is this household better off with the extra $1,000 a month gross wages? And if you can type into the chat, great. Yes, they are. And someone even said, of course. Here's why I like to stress that point. Years ago, I got a call from a man who was inquiring about how work would affect his benefits and whether he would qualify for a program in another state similar to the Medicaid buy-in for working persons with disabilities in New York. And I was talking to him about that program, and he said, "Wait a minute, you need to be working for pay to get in that program." And I said, "Yes." And he said to me, "Oh, well, a couple of years ago, I was working for pay, but they reduced my food stamps, and so I quit my job." And I almost cried because I thought that if that gentleman had had somebody, a benefits planner or someone else, who could have shown him the impact on his overall net income of his earnings, he would have realized that, oh yeah, my SNAP benefit went down, but my net income went up a lot more than my SNAP benefit was reduced. So I always think of that guy when I think about this calculation. All right, any questions about how that calculation works? I saw something new in the chat. Let's see if I can get to it. Excuse me, I'm having trouble getting to the chat. Okay, I'm having a technical problem here. Please bear with me a moment. Okay, Ken asks, who would normally be doing these calculations? DSS? Yes, DSS is going to do these calculations. They won't be using this Excel sheet. They've got their own computerized system for doing the calculations. And DSS, the local DSS district office, is going to be doing the calculation that really matters. They're the ones who are determining the actual SNAP benefit amount. This calculator is designed to help you, or so you can help people who are maybe considering work or increasing their earnings estimate the impact of their earnings or projected earnings on the SNAP benefit amount they'll get and their net income. And the overall goal of all of these training modules we're doing, Medicaid, the SNAP, the HUD, et cetera, is so that you can help people determine or estimate the impact on all public benefits they get if they work or increase their earnings. And so they can see what their net income would be and make a really informed choice about work. But our job is not to determine actual benefit amounts. We're just providing estimates so that people have an idea, a good idea of how work is going to affect their benefits and their net incomes. So thank you for asking that question, Ken. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to clean up my sheet. I'm going to go through it line by line and change all the dollar amounts I entered to zeros, because I'm going to be starting fresh now with our next exercise. We're going to do the next one together, and then you're going to do the next 8 on your own. Another way of doing this, of course, would be to simply uh, exit out of the document without saving it and then just open the clean one, the original one. But I don't want to risk losing it. So, okay. Now we're going to go back to the PowerPoint where we've got these exercises. So the first one is Tiffany, who lives alone in Onondaga County, receives $1,054 a month SSI. She rents a room, pays $500 a month for rent. She pays for electricity to operate her window air conditioner in the summer. And we want to estimate how much her SNAP benefit should be. So the key points are she doesn't live in the city or Nassau or Suffolk County. She lives elsewhere in the state. That's going to become relevant. She has 1,054 SSI, which is unearned income in the SNAP calculation. She pays $500 a month for rent, and she pays for electricity to operate her window air conditioner in the summer. And we'll assume that she's paying less than $854 a month for electricity. And because she's paying for cooling, for the electricity for the window air conditioners, she can use the standard allowance for heating or cooling. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you haven't already done this, open up your SNAP calculator. And let's do this one together. Okay, remember we work from the top down, starting with the household size. Tiffany lives alone, so her household size on line 4 will be 1. Next line down is unearned monthly income. She gets 1,054 SSI. Can enter that on line 8. Gross monthly wages, she's not working, at least not yet. No self-employment income or business expenses. The standard deduction on line 16 was automatically entered. She doesn't have any medical expenses that we know of, no pass, no dependent care payments, no court-ordered child support. She's not homeless. That brings us down to line 29, monthly rent or mortgage, because she is paying for utilities separately from her rent. And her rent was $500 a month. That goes on line 29. And then we figured out she's eligible for the standard allowance for heating or cooling outside of the city, Nassau, and Suffolk counties. For the rest of the state, the standard allowance is $854 a month. And as long as Tiffany is paying less than that, $854 or less for her electricity, I think that's a safe bet, she can enter the entire $854 standard allowance. If she were paying more than that, she could enter the actual amount. So that's her utility allowance. And then how much would her SNAP benefit be? Down on line 41, $292 a month, which is the maximum. Okay. So if you haven't entered these amounts on your sheet, please go ahead and do that, because we're going to take this and then make a change to Tiffany's circumstances. She's going to start working. And then you're going to make that change in your SNAP calculator and figure out the impact on her SNAP benefit of her earnings. So, with your SNAP calculator open, on line 4, the household size, it should say 1. Line 8, unearned monthly income, 1,054. And then down to line 29, monthly rent or mortgage, that should be 500. And line 30, standard allowance for heating or cooling, should say 854. And if you enter all those dollar amounts, the SNAP benefit on line 41 should be 292. So you can minimize your calculator. And let's go back to the PowerPoint and see what's going to happen to Tiffany next. Okay, so before she starts working, she's getting $292 a month of SNAP, the maximum for her household size. Now, she gets a job. She's paid $180 a week gross wages, which averages out to $780 a month gross wages. On average, her SSI is reduced to $706.50 a month. And nothing else in her situation has changed. So you're going to change your sheet. You're going to have to change her SSI amount, which was 1,054, change it to 706.50, and enter her gross wages on the wage line of 780. So if you can do that on your own, then you'll be able to see how much, estimate how much her new SNAP benefit should be when she's working and earning 780 a month gross wages. And then you can go ahead and enter the amount you calculated in the chat. Because these are estimates, I'm not going to quibble over a dollar or a few cents here or there. But generally, the SNAP benefit amount will be rounded down to the nearest whole dollar. Okay. So people are saying $191, and Christopher says, definitely better off working. Absolutely, because the SNAP benefit went down from 292 to, why did I come up with 202? Yeah, check that. Even though the SNAP benefit went down, her income went way up because she's earning $780 a month. Okay, and I did these in advance, so let me find Tiffany. Back here. So her SNAP is 682.50, wages 780. Make those changes. Hmm. So I got 202. Looks like everyone else got 191. Let's see if we can figure out what happened.
Yeah, um your SSI payment is different.
Ah, I see here. Okay. The SSI should be 702.50. Excuse me. Okay. And then that does bring it down to, well, now I'm getting 193.
So the unearned monthly income was 706.50 is what you originally gave us for the SSI.
Apologize for that. 706.50. And then sure enough, it brings it down to 191. Okay. Apologize. So I will correct that on the PowerPoint and send you that along with the revised calculation sheet.
Michael, I
Yes.
think you did part three, and this another one, a different one? Because it seems like this is a little different. Maybe I'm
Um,
wrong.
well, with Tiffany, we have just two scenarios with
Okay,
she's working and then when she's working. And then we're going to move on to a different person.
got it.
Okay. Okay. So any questions about Tiffany and how we did that calculation? All right. Next, we've got Kofi, who lives alone in Erie County. He gets $14.20 a month SSDI. He pays $60 a month for copays for therapy. He pays $200 a month for court-ordered child support. And he rents a room for $600 a month. He also pays for gas for cooking and electricity, but not heating or cooling. His landlord pays for heat. He lives in a basement apartment with no air conditioning, and he pays for his cell phone. So, about how much should his SNAP benefit be? And we're going to assume that he's paying a pretty limited amount for his utilities. He's not paying an excessive amount. All right. So, you're going to remember his household size. He's got unearned income. He's got a medical expense for the therapy. He's got court-ordered child support. He pays rent, and he's going to have a utility allowance. If you enter all those correctly, you should get a pretty accurate SNAP estimate. Okay, Gigi, thank you for attending. Okay, we've got a few different answers appearing. I got 130, which was the most common answer. And I'll show you my calculation. Find it. Okay, so we've got a household size of 1, unearned monthly income, line 8 of 1420, monthly medical expenses, line 17, $60, court ordered child support, line 23, $200, monthly rent or mortgage, line 29, $600, line 31, standard allowance for utilities, $346, assuming that Kofi is not paying more than that for his utilities. And the SNAP benefit amount works out to about 129 or 130. I wouldn't quibble. These are only estimates anyway. Carlos asks, what about the $25 medical deduction? That's actually calculated automatically. When we entered $60 for the co-pays for therapy that he pays for on line 17, the spreadsheet automatically subtracts $35 from the medical expenses, and that leaves a net of $25. That was actually calculated by the sheet automatically. Okay, good question. Maryland's line 18 didn't work. Sometimes these sheets get corrupted, and the best thing to do is to exit out without saving it, open the sheet from scratch, and then just go ahead and enter the numbers again. Sorry that happened to you, Marilyn. Okay, now next is going to be Kofi again, and his situation is going to change. Now he starts a job. He's paid $80 a week gross wages, which is $347 a month. And his child support payment increases to $300 a month. Everything else for Kofi is the same. So now you've got gross wages and you have a changed amount for child support. So if you go ahead and make those two changes, see what happens to his SNAP benefit amount, and you can enter it in the chat. Yes, a few of you had to restart, so give you another few seconds here. And we're getting people saying about $49 or $50 a month. Let me show you mine. Changed the gross wage or added gross wages of 347, increased court-ordered child support on line 23 to 300, and $49.93, so 49 or $50 would be correct. Sorry, Marilyn. If you email me, I can send you a new copy of the sheet. It sounds like yours must have been fatally corrupted somehow. Don't know how, but I'll be happy to send that to you again. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. So I figured out what went wrong on my first Tiffany exercise. I originally developed this for 2024, updated it for 2025, and I missed the increased SSI amount for Tiffany based on the 2025 cost of living adjustment. So sorry, I missed that. Moving on, Philomena and Emilio are married and live in an apartment together. Philomena gets $12.80 a month SSDI. Emilio works and is paid $520 a month gross wages. They have no other income. Their rent is $800 a month and includes utilities. But they pay $60 a month for a cell phone plan. So about how much should their SNAP benefit be? So the key issues then to remember are the household size, the unearned income, the gross wages, the rent, and the utility allowance. So if your calculation sheet is working, please go ahead and take a crack at this and you can enter a dollar amount in the chat. Okay, it looks like people are getting about $122 a month for SNAP. And yeah, I said 123. That's not going to quibble. Um, Here's what my sheet looks like. It's a household of two. 1,280 SSDI is unearned monthly income, line 8. Line 9, 520 gross wages. Down to line 29, monthly rent, 800. And line 32, standard allowance for telephone, usually listed as $31 a month, but they're paying more. They're paying 60 a month. So you'd enter 60 and you get 122.60. So 122, 123 would be accurate estimates. All right, and now their situation is going to change again. Philomena begins a job. She's paid $240 a week gross wages, which is $1,040 a month, and nothing else changes. So now you're going to have to adjust the gross wage amount. Now you're going to need to add Philomena's gross wages onto the gross wages that were already entered on the sheet. And then you can enter your SNAP amount. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you for attending. Okay. And it looks like pretty much everyone is agreeing on 0. My answer was $23 a month. Why? It's not because your calculation was wrong, but it's a little wild card here.
Did unearned income change? Probably, right?
It's,
From
it's actually because of categorical eligibility.
okay.
Just trying to find which sheets is the right one. It's not this. Here it is. Okay. So those of you who answered 0 were answering correctly what the dollar amount showed you
Yep.
for the SNAP benefit amount, 0. But here's the key. If you go back down to this categorical eligibility section, it reminds us that a categorically eligible household of 1 or 2 people receives a minimum benefit of $23 a month after the first month, even if the SNAP calculation shows they should get less. Okay. So the SNAP calculation shows they should get 0, but they are a household of 2. Are they categorically eligible? Let's take a look at whether they meet the 200% federal poverty level for gross income test. That's at the bottom of your sheet. Their gross household income is $2,840 a month.
Right.
200% of federal poverty for a 2-person household is 3,407. So their
Mm-hmm.
gross income is under 200% of federal poverty. That means they're categorically eligible. They're a household of 2 people. That means they get $23 a month, even though the calculation shows they should get 0. Now, isn't that weird? The big
Yeah.
question is, would it be worth it for them to have to deal with the DSS district office and all that entails for just 23 bucks a month? That's their choice. But they are eligible for 23 a month.
That's a trick one.
It was, that was tricky. Okay. All right. How are we doing on time here? Um, I think what we're going to do is hold off on doing any more exercises for now, because I want to make sure we can cover the other issues, the other slides we've got. So if we have time, we'll come back to these, but I'm going to go ahead and skip through them and go on to slide 73. So there's a program called New York State Combined Application Project, or NYSCAP, that automatically enrolls in SNAP single adults who live alone, who get SSI, and who don't receive in-kind support and maintenance. For those of you unfamiliar with SSI, that just means the person's SSI is not reduced because they're not paying for housing. So they are paying for their own housing, and they get SSI, they live alone, they're single. There are exceptions, but generally, people who meet those criteria are automatically enrolled in SNAP, and they'll get at least the minimum SNAP benefit of $23 a month, but they could get more if they apply and show, the calculation shows they should get more. One advantage to them is that their certification period is 3 years. They don't have to recertify for 3 years, which is much better than most people on SNAP that we'll talk about in a moment. Another special SNAP benefit is called transitional SNAP, or transitional benefits alternative. And this is SNAP for households that started out on family assistance or safety net assistance. These are the two programs called temporary assistance to needy families generically. These are the two programs in New York for low-income families with dependent children. And if a family transitions off the family assistance or safety net assistance program, then they can still keep SNAP for 5 extra months, and their SNAP benefit will not be reduced even if they have an increase in income. So it's basically a 5-month cushion that allows families to keep that SNAP an extra 5 months. After those 5 months, then they would have to recertify in order to determine whether they can still get SNAP. Okay, so it kind of tides them over, makes the transition off family assistance or safety net assistance a little more palatable because they can at least keep their SNAP. So what about reporting changes to the local DSS office? There are a few rules for this. Households that have earned income for any household member, that have certification periods of 6 months or 12 months, we'll get to that momentarily, follow what are known as the simplified reporting rules for reporting changes. They only have to report if their gross income goes from less than 130% of federal poverty to over 130% of federal poverty. If that change occurs, they have to report that to DSS within 10 days after the end of the month when the change occurred. Except able-bodied adults without dependents And these households also have to report if their work hours fall below 80 hours a month. Okay. Now, if a household subject to simplified reporting already has gross income over 130% of federal poverty, they don't have to report any increases in their income until the next time they get a redetermination. That's the formal redetermination of eligibility. They don't have to report anything else until the next redetermination. So that's simple. What it means is if you don't have to report changes, and those changes would ordinarily reduce your SNAP benefit, then the reduction is going to be delayed instead of it happening right away because you reported the change right away. The change isn't reported until the next redetermination, whenever that may be. And if the redetermination reduces your SNAP benefit, that's when it goes down. It doesn't get reduced immediately when the change occurred. So simplified reporting can delay reductions in SNAP as a result. And it greatly limits the kinds of changes that need to be reported. Slide 76 shows the 130% of federal poverty level amounts for different household sizes. So you know who would be subject to reporting or not. Now, if a household is not subject to simplified reporting, then they use the change reporting rules. And that means there are certain changes they do need to report by the 10th day of the month after the month the change occurred. And you'll find a list of them on slides 77 and 78, the kinds of changes that do need to be reported. And households that are subject to change reporting that have certification periods of more than 6 months will get also a periodic report form 6 months into their certification period. That's just kind of an interim check to see if there have been any changes. But they don't otherwise report any changes until their next redetermination, except the ones listed on slides 77 and 78. So people who get SNAP automatically through the NYESS cap program don't have to report changes, except 18 months into their 3-year certification period, they get a benefit interim report where they will report certain basic changes, if any. And for the transitioning SNAP, transitioning benefit alternative, they don't have to report any changes during that 5-month period. Okay, we already talked about the substantial lottery or gambling winnings of at least $4,500. Those always have to be reported regardless of the reporting rules for the SNAP household. They always have to be reported by the 10th day of the next month after the winnings were received. What about reporting changes that would increase the SNAP benefit amount? Well, a household can report those right away, and they're going to want to. So if, say, earnings or other income get reduced, and that would cause the SNAP benefit to increase, the household can report that change right away to the local DSS office, and then it won't delay having the SNAP benefit increased. Changes can be reported online using a change report form that can be mailed, faxed, or delivered to DSS, or you can call or visit the DSS district office if that's your idea of a good time. Then for redeterminations, the redeterminations are done at the end of the certification period, where they do a full reevaluation of eligibility. So the certification periods are going to be 6 months if there are adults in the household who have earned income, 12 months if changes in income or household status are not likely and no adult members are working. 24 months if all adult members are either disabled or at least 60 years old and have stable income, and 36 months for NYESS cap and another program called Elderly Simplified Application Project. Um, so obviously it's preferable to have a longer certification period because it means the redeterminations won't be as frequent. How do you apply? You can do it online or by contacting the local DSS office. And links can be found on slide 85. After submitting the application, the DSS worker will contact the applicant for an interview, either by phone or in person. They'll need to provide documents to prove eligibility. They'll generally get approved for benefits, assuming they're eligible, and will start getting benefits within 30 days. There are certain people in dire straits, certain households that qualify for expedited service who can get benefits within 7 days. And those who qualify for expedited service are, really destitute, and the criteria are on slide 87. And then if you want to look into deeper details about the regulations, the source book, which outlines SNAP policy, the web page, you'll find links on slides 88 and slide 89. Also shows messages that are periodically issued that describe changes in the SNAP program. Most of them occur October 1st, but occasionally there will be other changes that might take effect like January. Okay. So with the little bit of time we have left, did want to go back to our exercises, give you a shot at another one or two. Let's do number 7, Charisse and Wanda. They are married and they live in an apartment with their 2 young children, Lisa and Bert, in Nassau County. Charisse gets $867 a month unemployment insurance. That's unearned income. Wanda gets $1,510 a month of SSDI, also unearned income. Family has no other income. They pay $1,000 a month rent. They pay an average of $80 a month for electricity separately from their rent. They don't pay for phone service. So about how much should their SNAP benefit be? Okay, thank you, Travis. Anybody else get an answer yet? Yeah, sorry about that, Marcia. So I will be sending you the revised SNAP calculation with, that other information that I had mentioned, eliminating the upper limit on dependent care payments. And with luck, that will work. I'm also going to correct that one uh, error with the Tiffany example because I hadn't updated the SSI for 2025. I'll send you the revised PowerPoint for that. Okay, we've got a few different answers here. Let me pull up my sheet. Okay, so I have a household size of 4. I added the unemployment and the SSDI together. So the unearned income on line 8 is 2377. The rent on line 29 is 1,000. And the standard allowance for utilities is 378 a month because they live in Nassau County. And they're actually paying less than that, so they get to use the $378 amount. And that gives you about 416 a month SNAP. Okay. And we are out of time we won't have time for the last couple. There's another one for Sharice and Wanda where they're working. And then finally, there's one for a gentleman named Dave. It's a slightly revised version of someone I worked with years ago, who lives in a residential program and is paying for a cost of care, which is being allowed by DSS as a medical expense, and he's paying for housing as well. So if you ever have an inkling to check those out, please feel free. So does anyone have any questions in the last 2 minutes we have before calling it a day? All right. Wonderful. Thank you very much for participating. And I will be sending you the revised SNAP calculator and the slightly revised PowerPoint. And look forward to seeing most of you, I hope, when we do the HUD rental assistance program training, which also features a calculation sheet for estimating rents for households that get rental assistance. Thank you. And if there's anyone who wants to ask any questions privately or anything, I'll stick around for a few minutes just in case. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Take care.
Bye-bye. So, Ken, it looks like you're asking a question. Why line 31 for utilities? Okay, I'm gonna pull up my sheet again. Bear with me while I share my screen. Okay, so they were paying for just electricity that's not operating their heating or cooling. So they can't use line 30, the standard allowance for heating or cooling. But they are paying for at least one other utility, namely electricity. And so they get to use the standard allowance for utilities. As it says, if not paying for heating or cooling, but paying for at least one other utility other than phone. And they're paying $80 a month on average. And remember, they get to use the greater of the standard amount or the actual amount that they're paying. Well, they're paying less than the standard amount, which is $378 a month for their county. So they get to deduct the full $378. I hope that made sense. If not, just let me know. Okay, great. Thanks, Ken. All right, if there are no further questions, I'm going to go ahead and shut us down. Thank you very much.